We start in South Korea, where President Yoon Suk Yeol is now facing growing calls to resign after his short-lived declaration of martial law. In the last few minutes, opposition parties say they have begun impeachment proceedings against President Yoon, which could be voted on in the next 48 hours. Meanwhile, the head of the country's biggest labor union has called a nationwide strike. There have been mass demonstrations outside the main parliament building in Seoul. The crisis has alarmed many around the world. Both the US and UK say they're relieved the president reversed his decision, but are deeply concerned about what is going to happen next in South Korea. Well, let's go live to the capital, Seoul, now, where my colleague Steve Lai is outside the South Korean parliament. Steve, we're hearing that 6 opposition parties now have begun the impeachment process. Your detail on the latest, please.
Yeah, that's right. This is something that we've been waiting for and looking out for here in Seoul. I'm standing outside the National Assembly. You can hear a large rally, a large crowd behind me as different speakers are sort of taking to the mic to rail against the president and the actions that we've seen with him bringing in martial law over the last 24 hours. You mentioned the impeachment process. Yes, that's our understanding too, that it has begun, that opposition party members have pushed forward the motion to begin. Now, there are 300 members of parliament in the National Assembly, and for a motion of impeachment to proceed, it needs the majority. So 151 members will need to support this motion. But this, just to give you an idea of the sequence of events, now that it has been put forward, the next step is for the Speaker, Woo Won-sik, to open a session, and the earliest for that to happen will now be tomorrow. Then there is a mandatory 24-hour period before it can go forward to a vote, and that vote is going to determine whether or not the President Yoon Suk Yeol will be impeached. Just to give you an idea how many votes are needed, I mentioned there are 300 members of parliament in the National Assembly. You need a 2/3 majority, so 200 votes will be needed to impeach the president. Now, his party, the PPP, have 108 members of parliament, so if they all toe the party line, it would be impossible for him to be impeached. So the opposition parties are hoping that they can bring some people across, and that some people will turn away from President Yoon Suk Yeol and vote with the opposition to impeach him. They do have some reason to be somewhat optimistic about that. There were 18 PPP members that broke ranks last night in order to vote against the declaration of martial law. So there's some division within President Yoon Suk Yeol's party over the actions that we've seen, and it could lead to him being impeached. But we'll have to wait and see as this process plays out over the next day or two.
And there's been an awful lot of activity, hasn't there, since he declared martial law, then revoked it. We've got reports of the Prime Minister calling for emergency meetings with top officials. The central bank has convened an emergency meeting, also strike action being called for.
Yeah, that's right. Across the board, there's been a response to what we've seen. You talk about the strike action. The biggest trade union has said that they will go on strike until he steps down from office. So there's pressure coming from the private sector, from unions, from politicians as well. President Yoon is finding himself in a very difficult position. He hasn't come out to say whether or not he's going to step down. That's what the people behind me are rallying, asking for him to do. So there's a few different ways it could play out. He could step down himself, or we could go through this impeachment process, which, as I said, has just begun here this afternoon in Seoul.
Steve, for now, thank you so much. Steve Lai there, who is outside the Parliament in Seoul.